I took the job at High Ridge because it came with quiet winters, a regular paycheck, and no paperwork with my name on the last page. Most nights, the control room felt like a waiting room for nothing in particular. Screens humming, heaters ticking, mountain wind whirring the glass. 48 hours before the blizzard was due to shut the pass, it felt the same. Until it didn't. The forecast sat in the corner screen, all blues and whites marching across a map that never cared who got buried underneath. The radio repeated the usual phrases about road closures and travel advisories. I logged systems checks, cameras, alarms, generator status. My handwriting had settled into a neat, anonymous script over the past few years. It was a good disguise for a man who used to sign his name on reports that ruined lives. When the printer spat out the pre-storm checklist, a plastic box under the desk rattled. I nudged it with my boot and heard the dull clack of old cassettes inside. We were supposed to have digitized everything long ago, supposed to have destroyed what was obsolete. High Ridge liked new screens and fresh paint the way some people like therapy. Hide the cracks. I hope no one looks at the foundations. I pulled the box out, mostly to keep myself awake. Dust, old labels, half peeled, dates from seasons I had never worked here. One tape sat at the bottom with no handwriting, just a smudge where the label should have been. And I told myself I was only checking if it belonged in the bin. That was the first lie of the night. The old VCR still lived under the main console. We kept it for training videos and for the handful of analog feeds that never got upgraded. I slid the cassette in. The machine groaned like it resented being remembered. On the monitors, snow moved sideways across the dark slopes, soundless. In the headphones, everything else came back. Static first, a long breath of it, like the mountain itself drawing air. Then, footsteps in a corridor I could not yet place. A voice, male, strained, echoing against concrete. My name, shouted once, then again, louder, rising into panic. Not my title, not a garbled call sign, my full name, the one at the top of the disciplinary report that ended my police career 15 years ago. For a second I thought I was mishearing it, forcing old guilt into random noise. Then I heard it with the flat certainty of a recorded fact. The man on that tape knew who I was and expected me to answer. I had never heard his voice before in my life. According to every page I ever signed, I had never had the chance. I stopped the tape with a thumb that did not feel like it belonged to a 60-kilo bag of flesh. It felt like a trigger finger again. The time code on the tiny display blinked up at me. A string of numbers I instantly translated into the night my life fell apart. Same date, same hour, different story. For a long moment I sat there listening to the hum of the heaters and the faint hiss of snow on the glass. The radio droned on about chains for tires, about travelers advised to turn back. My pen lay where I had dropped it, blotting ink into the checklist. The room smelled of old plastic and burnt dust. I could have ejected the cassette and slid it back into the box, logged it as junk, another relic from the analog age. That would have been the sensible, safe thing to do. High Ridge did not pay me to chase ghosts. It paid me to keep fire exits clear and drunk guests from falling off balconies. Instead, I rewound the tape to the beginning and watched the counter roll back in slow green digits. I told myself I only needed to confirm what I heard, to prove it to myself before I forgot. And that was the second lie. When I finally turned off the VCR and put the cassette on the desk beside me, the storm clock on the screen read 2 days until the pass closed. I was no longer alone in that room with the weather. I was alone with a voice that should not exist and a question I had dodged for 15 years. By the time my shift log reached the line for incident reports, My hand hovered over the blank space and moved on. No incident. I wrote, "Systems nominal." Somewhere in the stacks, the missing person file with my signature on it stayed exactly the same, only I had changed. I now knew there was at least one piece of evidence High Ridge had never meant me to hear. The heaters clicked over to a higher setting. The wind rose outside, scratching at the building like it wanted to get in. I sat in the glow of the monitors and listened to the tape play again, this time only in my head, the man's voice burning through the static with my name on his tongue. If I was smart, I would have left it there. Let the blizzard come and go, collect my hours, keep my head down. I did not know it yet, but I had already stepped off that safer road the moment I pressed play. I could have logged the tape as a glitch and blamed the sound on old magnetic rust. High Ridge was full of things that did not quite match their labels. Carpets that looked new from a distance. Walls that had seen more coats than I ever wanted to count. The next morning, the lobby pretended the mountain was a postcard and not a trap tightening under the forecast. I walked to the main level with my clipboard while guests checked out early, dragging suitcases that squeaked across polished stone. The fire in the central hearth burned clean and bright. Someone had arranged mugs and blankets to look casual, like we did not calculate every comfort into the nightly rate. Behind the reception desk, the big screen looped promotional footage of smiling couples and clear roads. From where I stood, I could see the glass doors and, beyond them, the line of the pass cutting into the sky. By sunset, the plows would give up. By tomorrow night, no one would be driving anywhere without chains. Luck, and a bad reason. I had lived through enough winters up here to know when the mountain meant it. The general manager intercepted me halfway between the desk and the bar. He wore the kind of jacket that said he understood both spreadsheets and wine lists. He thanked me for the storm preparation I had logged overnight, then steered me toward the office corridor with a hand on my elbow that never quite touched. He walked me through the numbers in his calm conference voice. Occupancy graphs, energy costs, the timing of the rebrand campaign. In 2 weeks, High Ridge would be selling itself under a fresh name with a softer color palette. There were new investors, a legal hold on any old claims while the paperwork smoothed out, and a very clear condition from the board that nothing messy hit the news between now and then. He laid it out like a weather report. If we kept incidents at zero, the town kept its biggest employer, the staff kept their jobs, and he kept his own head above water in a market that did not forgive failure. He did not have to say what happened if we slipped. I had been in enough briefings to recognize when risk management was really fear. I nodded in the right places, asked about sandbags and window latches, anything that kept the conversation on the surface. When he asked about overnight events, I told him systems had behaved, guests had gone to bed early, and the wind had done most of the talking. All technically true. None of it touched the cassette, now wrapped in a cleaning cloth at the bottom of my bag. In the control room again, I filed the morning's checks and opened the digital archive just long enough to confirm what I already knew. The missing guest's file sat there like a frostbitten finger, neat and pale, and numb. No audio attachments. No mention of any recording taken from that night. If the tape I had found ever belonged to a case, it had somehow drifted out of the official channels and into a forgotten plastic box. I slid my bag under the console, away from the security cameras I knew were still live. The irony did not escape me. 15 years ago, I had trusted a feed and a fellow officer over my own unease. This time, I did not tell anyone what I was about to do. I played the tape again, volume low enough that only I heard the static in the footsteps. When my name came, I watched the tiny counter roll past the timestamp burned into my memory. The voice on the tape shouted, then sobbed, then faded into a sound I could not place yet. A metallic thump. A scrape. The hollow echo of somewhere not meant for guests. When the tape clicked off, I ejected it and fed it into the old duplication deck our techs were supposed to have decommissioned last year. The machine whined, then accepted its task. I watched timers blink, 2 sets of numbers advancing together. One for the copy, one for the storm system on the weather feed. By the time both had finished, I had an original cassette with no proper label and a fresh copy with my own scrawl on the spine. I wrote only the date on it, nothing more. Just enough to anchor it in time if I had to argue chain of custody later. Old habits die louder than they say. I wrapped the copy in a spare pair of thermal socks and pushed it deep into my locker behind rolled maps and a first aid kit. The original went back into the plastic box with its quiet siblings. If anyone checked, they would see one more anonymous tape in a pile no one cared about. If they searched me, they would find socks and aspirin and a man past his prime clinging to a steady job. Out in the hallway, the younger night clerk joked with housekeeping about riding a sled down the emergency stairs if the lifts failed. The joke had that tight edge people get when they know the road home is about to disappear under ice. High Ridge attracted seasonal staff who could not afford to get stuck anywhere for long. A scandal right now would trap them as surely as a snowed-in pass. I stood in the doorway and watched them laugh, thinking about the graphs on the manager's tablet, the board's conditions, the town wrapped around the resort like smaller buildings around a cathedral. My secret now had more weight than just a voice on tape. If I pulled at it carelessly, the whole structure could shift. Back in the control room, I sat down with the fresh copy of the tape cached away and the original back where I found it. On the log, I wrote that all storm preparations were complete and that we expected the pass to close within 48 hours. It was the truth, just not the whole of it. I told myself I would wait, give it a day, 2 at most, see what the storm did, see if the feeling passed. I had said similar things to myself 15 years ago. The mountain did not care either time. It just kept bringing weather. The difference now was that High Ridge had brought me back and handed me the one sound I had never been allowed to hear. The rules at High Ridge were written for people who had never lost a badge. No unauthorized access to archived incident reports. No tampering with records. No digging into complaints older than 2 years without written approval. Sensible. Tidy. The kind of rules I would have enforced once without thinking. After my round with the manager, I sat alone in the control room while early checkouts rolled their bags across the lobby above me. The Stormwatch banner on the weather feed had shifted from yellow to orange. The mountain had started its slow, patient work. I opened the staff handbook, left it on the desk as a prop, then logged into the archive with the master keycard I was trusted to use sparingly. The missing person file was easier to find than I wanted it to be. 1 search term, 1 date, my own name in the investigator field. I stared at the screen for a moment before opening it, as if the file might be kind enough to stay shut. It wasn't. It opened as fast and flat as any other document. The official narrative ran down the page in familiar phrases. Guest last seen leaving bar area. Appeared intoxicated. Failed to return to room. Search conducted along marked trails and vehicle routes. No evidence of foul play. Further investigation suspended pending new information. My signature at the bottom looked younger than I remembered my hand ever being. I scrolled to the timeline section and traced the entries with my finger. Call logged by front desk at 2240. Officers notified at 2300. Search initiated at 2315. I knew those numbers by heart. They had lived in the back of my head for 15 years, like coordinates on a map I had never quite burned. The tape on my desk did not care about that map. Its time code had put the voice calling my name at 2228. 12 minutes before the desk even rang my phone. 12 minutes when, according to the report, nothing at all had happened. I double-checked dates, daylight savings, any excuse I could invent. The numbers held. The man on the tape had been calling me by name while, on paper, he was still just another guest enjoying the bar. A memory shifted, one I had kept dull for a long time. I saw myself at the end of a shift back then, standing near the same control room, talking with a younger tech about a camera fault in one of the stairwells. I remembered the relief of hearing him say it was already logged, already handled. One less thing on my list before I went out into the wind with a flashlight and a radio. Back on the screen, the maintenance section of the file was thin. Routine checks completed. No anomalies reported. Cameras functioning. Signed off by the same department that now sent me cheery emails about snow load and generator fuel. I opened the separate maintenance log for that week. It took longer. Different system, different password. When it finally let me in, I searched by date and time, drilled down into the evening. Lines of text marched past, boiler checks, lift resets, fire doors tested. One entry near the time on the tape caught my eye. Stairwell cam 4, status adjusted, routine reset. No explanation, no work order attached. Signed only with initials. I knew those initials. I had heard them introduced to me the week I started at High Ridge. Senior maintenance, 20 years on the mountain, knew every pipe and cable. Back then, when my uniform had still smelled of city streets, he had been one of the few to clap me on the shoulder and say it was good to have someone with real police experience around. Now his initials sat next to a camera adjustment at the exact moment a stranger had shouted my name and no one had called me. I scrolled further down the maintenance log. The next note was about checking a door sensor in the loading bay. The one after that, a coffee break scribble someone had never bothered to delete. Nothing else about stairwell cam 4 that night. On paper, everything still looked reasonable. Cameras checked. Guest drunk. Officer notified on time. Search conducted. Case suspended. All the words we used when we didn't want to say we were tired or cold or out of our depth. I leaned back and listened to the soft hum of the servers, the whisper of the ventilation. The empty chair beside me might as well have been occupied. I could feel the shape of the man who had signed that camera entry, the weight of my younger self nodding along to his reassurance that nothing on the monitors needed more than a glance. The handbook on the desk told me I had just committed a policy violation by opening these files without clearance. The part of me that used to teach rookies about chain of custody reminded me that I had now mixed personal curiosity with official systems. The part that had listened to the tape twice did not care. I closed the maintenance log and the incident report and sat there for a long heartbeat, fingers hovering over the keyboard. I could have logged out and pretended the discrepancy never existed. I could have convinced myself that clocks drift, that analog audio lies, that memory is cruel and soft. Instead, I wrote the time code from the tape on a sticky note and slid it into my pocket. I printed the maintenance entry and folded it into my notebook. The printer chattered quietly, like it was trying not to draw attention to itself. On my shift sheet, I left the incident section blank again. No guest fights, no broken glass, no alarms. Just me, a screen full of old words, and a small stack of paper that said those words might not be the whole truth. I told myself I was still only looking, not accusing, not reopening anything, not yet. That sounded better than what I had actually done, which was take the first deliberate step into a case the resort, the town, and I had all agreed to forget. The guest elevators never showed you the real High Ridge. They glided between floors with soft chimes and muted music, hiding the service shafts behind brushed metal. To see the actual skeleton of the place, you had to follow the people who wore keyrings on their belts instead of name tags on their chests. I caught the senior maintenance tech just after lunch, when he was checking the snow sensors along the loading dock. His jacket had the faded logo from 2 rebrands ago, a badge of seniority he wore without irony. He squinted at the sky the way you squint at an old injury and told me the storm would bite harder than the forecasts said. He had earned the right to be right about that. I told him I wanted to walk the back corridors with him, make sure we had no weak spots if the power flickered. It was a reasonable request on paper. The cameras and alarms ran through those spaces. If anything failed while guests huddled upstairs with their cocoa, it would fail down there first. He shrugged and handed me a spare flashlight out of habit. The service door clicked behind us, cutting off the lobby noise in a single, thick sound. The air changed. Warmer from boilers and ductwork, drier from constant circulation. The hum of compressors and pumps replaced the piano from upstairs. We walked single file where the corridor narrowed, pipes and cables stitched along the ceiling above our heads. He pointed out junction boxes, shut-off valves, places where snowmelt liked to creep in under doors. His commentary was practical, the same tone he had probably used for every security hire before me. It made what I was looking for feel more like trespass. "How long you been up here now?" he asked over his shoulder. His voice bounced off concrete and metal. "Couple of seasons," I said. "Long enough to know your shortcuts are worth learning." "Well, Tad." He chuckled at that, a low sound that fit the corridor. "These aren't shortcuts. These are the only routes that don't get you trapped when guests panic." "Well?" We passed a set of double doors that led to the main stairwell. The tiny camera above them watched us with its blank glass eye. I glanced up at the housing, at the cable feeding it. I could not help matching its ID number to the ones in the log I had printed that morning. "Ever had to pull anyone out of here in a storm?" I asked. "A few," he said. "Mostly staff trying to smoke where they shouldn't. Once or twice, a guest slept it off somewhere stupid. Now." His version of events slid over the old report in my mind, the line about intoxication and wandering. 2 stories. Same shorthand. I filed that away. Further along, the corridor dog-legged left. We stepped into a stretch with no cameras at all. The silence above our heads felt different there, like a missing tooth. On the right-hand side, a metal door broke the unpainted wall. No sign, no handle, just a rectangle of steel and a small plate where a lock might once have been. The lower half of the door showed a line of lighter metal, a rough seam that did not match the rest. You notice things like that when you have stared at too many scenes trying to decide what was new and what had always been there. "What's this one?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. "Old service access," he said. "Storage. Supply run back when we had fewer lifts. They sealed it up after they changed the layout. Before your time. Before mine. Even Vacation 17. He was lying about at least one of those points. The weld bead along the frame still had that faint, clean look that said it had not seen decades of dust. I ran my fingertips a few centimeters above it, not touching, just feeling the break in temperature where the metal met concrete. "You ever go in there?" I said. He shook his head. "Not since they closed it. No reason to. New plans don't even show it. Cheaper to weld it and forget it than rebuild the whole wing." He tapped the wall with his knuckles. "That's how they fix things now. Things X." "Who's they?" I asked. He shrugged again, that mountain shrug that meant people with clipboards and suits, without having to say it. Different owners over the years. Different managers. We just keep the lights on. "Oh, The weld line sat at knee height like a scar, too deliberate to be accident. If it had been structural, there would have been permits, notices, something in the maintenance records. Instead, there was a blank where this door should have lived, and a stairwell camera log marked routine adjustment right around the time a man disappeared. I let the silence stretch long enough to be noticeable, then nodded and moved on. Pushing too hard there would only draw attention to the question. You do not learn much from people who suddenly remember the time. We finished the circuit back at the loading bay, where the air tasted faintly of exhaust and melting frost. I thanked him for the tour, logged some notes about emergency lighting, and said nothing about the door. Not yet. Back in the control room, I pulled out the old structural plans High Ridge kept for insurance audits. The corridors matched in most places. In one section, though, where the lines bent around the service core, a small rectangle marked Service Stair Access sat exactly where my memory now placed that welded door. On the revised plans from 5 years ago, that rectangle was gone. No annotation, no explanation, just blank space. The guest file on my screen still insisted the missing man had last been seen near the bar and had simply walked out into the weather. The tape on my desk suggested he had gone into a stairwell instead. The weld in the corridor told me someone had later decided that whatever he found on the other side was not something High Ridge wanted to keep in the open. I had not yet proved that the door and the man were directly connected, but I had found the first piece of the building that looked as guilty as the paper. The missing guest had always been a case file to me first and a person second. That was the safest way to function back when I wore a gun. You learn the name, age, room number, then you learn the patterns. You tell yourself that if you do the patterns right, the person part will take care of itself. High Ridge did not post anniversary plaques for the ones who never checked out. Most guests who came back years later wanted to relive a honeymoon or a lucky ski season, not the night their family went missing. So when I saw the surname from my old report on a reservation list, it scraped across my nerves like ice under a door. I told myself it could be coincidence. Common name. Wrong branch of the family. Then the elevator opened, and the man who stepped out into the lobby carried the same set to his shoulders I had seen once in a police station waiting room 15 winters ago. He was older now, of course. We both were. Lines where we had not had any. The sharp, restless anger I remembered had settled into something heavier. He signed his check-in paperwork with a hand that hesitated half a second too long over the surname. I could have stayed behind the control room glass and watched him as just another guest profile moving through the system. Instead, I walked out into the lobby under the excuse of checking smoke detectors and emergency exits. He recognized me before I reached him. It showed in the flicker of his eyes, the way his jaw tightened. He looked at my security jacket, then at my face, weighing the difference. "You're still here," he said. No greeting, just a quiet verdict. "I came back," I said. Different badge. Same mountain. I'm now. He glanced around at the guests checking in, at the staff smiling on autopilot. When he spoke again, his voice stayed low. "They told us the case was closed," he said. "Nothing else to find. I thought that meant you left too." "And?" "They told me the same thing," I said. I did not add that I had left, that I had been helped toward the door, that I had spent years pretending it had been my idea. He shifted his bag from one hand to the other. "The letter they sent," he said. "The one that explained how the investigation exhausted all reasonable avenues. I could have recited it in my sleep for a while. Only, I remembered the wording. I had not been the one to write it, but I had signed off on the facts it leaned on. We had searched. We had filed. We had blamed the storm, the alcohol, the man's own choices, the gap where the tape should have been sat between us like a third person. Why come back? I asked. The question sounded more blunt out loud than in my head. He looked past me, toward the windows where snow had started to float down in lazy flakes. My partner wanted to see the place once, he said. Said it might help. We never made it. Life got in the way, and then she got sick. Now it's just me. Thought maybe I should see where he was last seen before the road shuts again. I've been dazed. There was no good answer to that. The lobby music cycled into another harmless tune. A child laughed near the reception desk, high and brief. It felt like the wrong soundtrack for the conversation we were having. We got the payout, he said, as if he had to confess it. Insurance. Some settlement from the owners. Signed a lot of papers. They said it was not an admission, just support. We used it. Paid debts. Moved. I don't regret surviving. He trailed off, searching for a word that fit. Regret, guilt, anger, all of them lived in the space his voice left open. He just never got a reason, I said. He nodded once. They told us there was nothing more to find, that he probably walked off drunk and the mountain took him. I wanted to believe that, because the alternative is that someone let him fall through the cracks. Or pushed him. He did not look at me when he said it. He looked at the brochure stand by the fireplace, at glossy photos of the resort in summer. If there was more, he said. If there was something someone missed, I'm not sure I want to know anymore. I've built a life on the version they gave us. But not knowing, that never really stops either. I'll just say. The double bind settled on my shoulders as neatly as any uniform. If I dug deeper and ripped the cover off what had really happened, I could give him answers that came with new wounds. If I left it alone, he would keep living on top of a lie I now knew existed. The mountain's going to close the road in a couple of days, I said. If you stay, you might get stuck here longer than you planned. Waving when. He gave a small, humorless smile. I was stuck here long enough already, he said. Maybe it's time I stayed on purpose. When Nako. I watched him walk away toward the reception desk, watched the clerk hand him a key card and a map of the facilities, as if that could orient him to the missing 15 years. He disappeared into the elevator with the same surname I had once written at the top of a file I had quietly stopped thinking about. Back in the control room, I opened that file again. The words had not changed. The effect they had on the man upstairs clearly hadn't either. The only new variable in the equation was the tape on my desk and the knowledge that the story he had been given was incomplete. I sat there with my hand on the drawer that held the cassette, listening to the storm forecast and the low murmur of lobby noise through the monitors. Whatever I decided to do next would not just rewrite my memory of the case. It would rewrite his. I had spent years telling myself there was nothing more to learn. The file was clean. The mountain was cruel. People vanished. That was the story. It fit in a paragraph, in a report, in the space you leave in your mind when you want a scar to look neat. The tape, the logs, the sealed door, and the man upstairs with the same surname no longer fit inside that paragraph. I spread the papers out on the control room desk like I was back in an evidence locker, the printed maintenance entry with the senior tech's initials, the old floor plan with its small rectangle of service stair access, the newer plan with that rectangle smoothened away, a copy of the incident report I had signed with a sticky note marking the timeline. On the monitor, the forecast pushed the storm front closer and slow. Relentless frames. 48 hours had become something less than 36. The road would close on schedule whether I put this puzzle together or not. I wrote 3 headings on a notepad: what the file said, what the tape said, what the building said. The file said the guest left the bar, staggered toward the main exit, and disappeared into weather before anyone could intervene. The tape said someone, almost certainly that same guest, had been in a stairwell or corridor at 2228, 12 minutes before the desk ever called, shouting my name as if I were the one who would answer. The building said there had once been a service stair, monitored and mapped, and that at some point after that night someone welded the access shut and erased it from the official plans. The simplest explanation was the one I had avoided forming into words. He had gone into that stairwell or service route. Something had happened there. Someone with access and authority had chosen to close the eye that might have seen it, then close the door that led there, then close the file on top of my signature. For the first time since I found the tape, I let myself say it. This was not just a tragic accident. It was a set of decisions, some of them mine. I remembered the younger version of myself standing in front of flickering monitors while the senior tech told me that camera faults in the service core were already logged and handled. The relief of accepting that, narrowing my search radius, writing checked, no sign, and moving on to the next sector. If he had been wrong that night, he had been wrong in a way that made my job easier. If he had lied in a way that let us both go home sooner. I had wanted to believe him. That wanting was on me. The man upstairs had built his life on the letter that fell out of that want: insurance, settlement, the phrase "no further leads." The manager had built his rebrand on the idea that High Ridge had weathered its one unsolved story and come out clean enough to sell again. The staff had built their wages on the resort keeping its biggest skeletons welded shut. If I dug, I would not just be unearthing my own mistake. I would be pulling at every life that had grown over it. The storm clock ticked down another hour. I looked from the notepad to the door, to the row of key hooks where staff badges hung between shifts. One path stayed the same. I could put everything back in the drawer, erase temporary logins, pretend none of this had ever reopened. Let the mountain take another season of tourists and seasonal workers without interference from one tired ex-cop. The other path was messier. It led through conversations no one wanted to have, rooms where I would not be invited, corridors someone had decided were better forgotten, and an ending with more headlines, more paperwork, and less job security for everyone within shouting distance. The detail that decided me was smaller and more selfish. On the tape, the man had called my name, not the department, not the room number. He had believed that I, specifically, would be listening. That faith had been misplaced once. If I turned away again now that I knew he had ever spoken, the second betrayal would not belong to the mountain or to High Ridge or to some company name on a legal letter. It would belong to me. I folded the plans and the logs back into my notebook, but I did not put them away. Under the 3 columns on my notepad, I wrote one more line: new objective. Find out who shut that door and why before the storm closes the road. It wasn't subtle or heroic, but it was honest. The handbook on the shelf said nothing about reopening old investigations. The staff manual cared only about current incidents, immediate threats. The unwritten manual that had governed my life since I left the job said keeping your head down was the only way to survive without a uniform. I pushed all of them aside. If I was going to chase this, I needed the storm as cover, inspections, drills, excuses to check spaces that usually stayed off limits while external eyes stayed away and internal tensions rose. I looked at the countdown on the screen and did the math in my head. 2 nights, maybe, before the pass closed fully. 1 day of calm checks. One night when guests would start to feel trapped. One final window when the staff would be too distracted to notice me threading questions through their routines. I had been running from this case for 15 years. High Ridge had brought me back and handed me the one piece of evidence I had never seen. The least I could do was stop running while there was still road ahead. I picked up the sticky note with the tape time code and slid it next to my ID on the lanyard. If anything happened to me, someone might eventually ask why it was there. It was a small, private contract with myself. Then I stood up, left the comfort of the screens, and went looking for the people who had been on duty the night the log said the cameras were adjusted. So the take. Once I admitted the case was broken, the people tied to it stopped being background. They turned into routes and obstacles the same way corridors did. I had spent 2 seasons learning their routines without meaning to. Now, I started using that knowledge on purpose. The senior tech liked his coffee at the far end of the staff lounge, back to the vending machines where he could see anyone coming in. The manager preferred the office with the glass wall over the lobby so he could watch the flow of guests. The younger clerk floated between them, trying to impress both and belong fully to neither. I timed my rounds to intercept each of them without making it look like a pattern. With the manager, I chose the pretext of a safety briefing. The storm was reason enough. I brought him updated notes on exit routes, backup lighting, generator status. He scrolled through my checklist on his tablet, nodding, fingers already calculating overtime. Good, he said. Last thing we need is a video of guests stumbling around in the dark making its way online before the rebrand goes live. His eyes tracked every line item that mentioned risk. I let him talk through the numbers, waited until he mentioned the board's expectations again. Then I asked the question that had been sitting behind my teeth since the relative checked in. What happens if someone brings up the old missing person case while the board is still watching the place? I said. Guests like that might talk. Press might listen. Mon. He hesitated. Just enough. We've had legal look at those files already, he said. Everything that can be done has been done. There's a legal hold on the old claims while the ownership transition finishes. No new liabilities. No surprises. That's the condition. Why? I recognized the phrase from the paperwork he had shown me. Legal hold. Dry on the page, heavier in the air. So if something new surfaced, I said, some oversight, some missed piece, instead, then it would need to be evaluated very carefully, he said. Right now the town is hanging on this transition. If the deal collapses, we don't just lose a brand. We lose most of payroll. Suppliers, contractors, you've seen the numbers. I'm not saying you hide anything, he added. I'm saying you weigh the timing. There's a difference between a live threat and an old scar. We treat live threats first. There you be. It was almost reasonable. Almost enough to make me fold the note with the tape time code a little tighter and wait until after the storm, after the rebrand, after some hypothetical better moment that never arrived. I signed that old report, I said. If there was an oversight, it would have my name under it. I being as deterrently. That was another regime, he said. Another company. You've done good work here since. People trust you now. Don't dig up something you can't fix, only to have the people who broke it walk away clean anyway. Oh. He smiled then, the professional kind, and shifted topics back to snow fences and guest messaging. In his mind, the conversation had been risk mitigation. In mine, it went under a different heading. He had not asked what I knew. He had made it clear what he hoped I would choose to do with it. Later, in the staff lounge, I watched the younger clerk laugh at a joke about being snowed in with a full minibar. The senior tech sat at his usual spot, reading a maintenance bulletin, glasses perched low on his nose. From across the room, he looked like any man his age, a little tired, a little resigned. I took my coffee and sat near him, close enough that he would feel the obligation to nod. He did. "Storm like this," I said, "ever remind you of that season when we lost that guest? Before my time here, but I read the old incident, so very Asconzinnery." He stiffened just enough that my training picked it up. The bulletin in his hand lowered a fraction. His mouth took longer to answer than his body. "Different owners, then," he said. "Different systems. We've improved a lot since. Maybe O's." "Still the same mountain," I said. He shrugged. "People do stupid things when they mix alcohol and altitude. You know that better than anyone." Aye. He was offering me the old narrative, polished and ready. Guest drunk. Bad choices. Nothing to be done. I let it sit between us for a beat. "Maintenance log shows you were on call that night," I said. "Busy shift." "And?" He looked at me properly then. Not as the ex-cop turned security hire, but as someone asking questions that did not match small talk. "Always busy during storms," he said. "Things fail. Sensors trip. Doors ice up. You prioritize. You can't be everywhere. Eh?" There were histories in his face I did not know yet. Payments made. Or refused. Orders followed or bent. I could have thrown the timestamp in his face, asked why a camera needed an adjustment 12 minutes before a man disappeared from every map. Instead, I backed off a half step. Too much audience here. Too many other staff in the room. If he was going to give me anything real, it would not be in front of the espresso machine. "I'll try to keep your radio quiet this time," I said. "As long as the cameras hold." "Now." His eyes flicked to my lanyard, to the folded note sitting just behind my ID. He couldn't read it, but he saw the way I touched it without thinking. "You do that," he said. "We all sleep better when the feeds are clean." I was own. It sounded like a harmless comment. It landed like a confession. By the time my break ended, I had taken what I needed. The manager would not help unless forced. His loyalty was to the deal and the town's economics. The senior tech was brittle around the edges of the old case and would either crack or snap if pushed. The younger clerk, still joking at the table, had not yet realized he was standing on a fault line between us. Agency is a word consultants like to use. In practice, it means deciding which bridge you are willing to burn and then walking across with your eyes open. That afternoon, with the storm thickening outside, I chose mine. Storm days made the control room feel more like a cockpit. Every alert, every flicker on the monitors mattered a little more. Guests depended on systems they never saw. Staff depended on those systems not making extra work in the middle of a whiteout. I depended on them for something else entirely. The younger clerk came in at the start of his shift, cheeks red from the cold, hair still holding the shape of a hastily removed beanie. He dropped his bag, signed the log, and started his usual sweep of screens with the brisk competence of someone determined not to be the weak link. "I need your help with something," I said. I kept my tone flat, nothing in it to suggest this was more than routine. He straightened, pleased at being asked. "Storm protocol," he said. I checked the training packet. "A uso de toe?" "Partly," I said. "I want a fresh set of eyes on the camera maps. You've been here long enough to know them, but not long enough to have bad habits. And tell you..." He smiled, then saw I meant it. I pulled up the layout on the main screen, the grid of camera IDs overlaid on the building's bones. He took the chair beside me, leaning in, tracing lines with his finger. We started with the obvious. Entrances, stairwells, elevators. He knew them. I let him talk, let him build confidence, then shifted the focus. Walk me through the service corridors, I said. From the loading dock to the old north wing. He frowned slightly. We don't really use that wing for guests anymore, he said. Just storage and staff housing. Deveyant. All the more reason to know where eyes are, I said. He zoomed the map in, followed the lines. Here, he said, and here. Then the junction by the laundry. He hesitated around the section where the welded door lived, the blind stretch with no icons. I always thought there was supposed to be a cam there, he added. Label jumps from 3 to 5 on the list. Creases. I brought up the camera list on a secondary screen. The sequence went 3, 4, 5, neatly, but the physical map showed only 2 units. Show me cam 4, I said. He clicked the ID. A view from a different stairwell filled one of the monitors. Not the blind stretch we had walked, but a cleaner, newer stair with fresh paint. They must have reassigned the number when they redid the core, he said. Keeps the list tidy. As tidy, I said. I switched over to the maintenance log viewer, called up the entry he did not know I had already printed. Look at this line, I said, highlighting the note from 15 years back. Stairwell cam 4. Status adjusted. Routine reset. He read it, then looked back at the map. That would have been the old position, he said slowly, before they moved it. So, before they welded that door, I said. He glanced at me, eyebrows pulling together. I thought that door was always sealed, he said. We were told not to worry about that section. He's lowered. We were told a lot of things, I said. Then I scrolled down. Now look at this. Because the log entries rolled forward by years. Once, twice, the same initials signed off on routine checks. Then, abruptly, a gap where the stair camera line vanished. On the map, the icon jumped from one location to another with no note about the in-between. When did you start here? I asked. 3 winters ago, he said. Has that camera ever been in a different place in your time? I said. No, he said. It's always been at the new stairwell, at least since I started. Why? Then because the system thinks it's been in both, I said. And the night we lost that guest, somebody adjusted it in a way the file never mentions. Is all. He sat back, chair creaking. His face moved through curiosity, confusion, then the first shadow of unease. He was good enough at this job to see the implication. You're saying someone pointed it away, he said. I'm saying the log records a manual adjustment at the exact time a man was calling for help from somewhere that camera should have seen, I said. And that later, someone took the whole stair out of the official picture. He swallowed. That's a lot, he said. If that's true, I vain make shows. It's not a theory, I said. It's numbers. I readed. He looked back at the initials on the old entry. Same ones he saw every week at the bottom of new checklists. The senior tech had been mentoring him, teaching him how to keep the place running. Now, those same letters were attached to a decision that might have left a man to vanish unrecorded. "He's the one who trained me," he said quietly. "Told me which alarms to take seriously, which sensors are flaky. I wouldn't even know half these routes without him. Everyone. That's why I asked you," I said. "You know the current layout, but you're not yet part of the history that wrote itself into the logs." La said. He shook his head, as if he could dislodge the conflict. "If I help you dig into this," he said, "and it turns out to be nothing, I've just stabbed my own mentor in the back over a coincidence. And if you look away," I said, "and it turns out to be something, you're carrying his choice without ever making your own. And—" The words came out sharper than I intended, edged with my own regret. He flinched, not because I had raised my voice, but because the shape of the choice was suddenly clear. The storm advisory chimed softly from the weather feed, a new alert about wind speeds on the pass. The countdown to closure shaved off another hour. Time was doing its own work while we argued with ourselves. "I need you to do one thing," I said. "Just one. For now. No row." He waited. "Watch how he reacts if you ask a harmless question about the old camera layout," I said. "Blame it on me if you want. Say I was confused about an ID. See if his answer matches the logs." "Isdarno." "You want me to test him?" he said. "I want you to notice," I said. "Whatever you do after that is your call. But you deserve to know which side of this you're on before the road closes and choices get made for you." And he stared at the screen a moment longer, then nodded once. "I'll ask," he said. "Casual. See what he says. He says die." He stood to leave, then paused at the door. "You really think this could blow up the way you're implying?" he said. "I think it already did," I said. "We're just the ones who arrived after the smoke cleared." End quote. When he was gone, the control room felt smaller. The evidence I had gathered no longer lived only in my notebook and in my head. It had started to spread, thin and invisible, into other people's consciences. That, more than any log entry, was the point you could not walk back from. By the time the first plow came grinding past the front entrance with its amber lights flashing, the forecast had stopped pretending. The storm that had been a distant swirl on a map now pressed its palm flat against the windows. Snow no longer drifted. It drove. The highway update blinked onto the control room feed. Wind gusts higher than predicted. Visibility dropping. Advisory upgraded from use caution to avoid travel unless essential. The estimate for closing the pass jumped forward 6 hours in one refresh. On the lobby camera, I watched people feel it before anyone said a word. Guests leaned closer to their phones in the glass. A kid building a snowman near the doors was hustled inside. The room's sound rose a notch, tighter at the edges. I printed the new advisory and took it upstairs. The general manager met me halfway, tablet already in his hand. Jaw set in, that particular professionalism he wore when he was scared. "They're going to shut the pass early," I said. "I see it," he said, lifting the tablet. "We clear as many rooms as we can before dark. Push departures now." I was woe. He was right for a normal storm. Fewer bodies meant fewer variables. But this was not just about weather. If we move everyone at once, the road clogs, and half of them get stranded halfway down, I said. "We stagger. Making res." "Already planned," he said. "Families first. Medical notes. The rest, we encourage to stay. Discounts if needed. It's in the playbook." His playbook didn't have a chapter on welded doors and missing tapes. "There are some people who shouldn't leave yet," I said. "Staff and guests." "A." His eyes sharpened. "Everyone should at least have the option. We don't hold people against their will." And I thought of the relative, the senior tech, the long-timers who had been here 15 years ago. Witnesses were not just names. They were bodies in reachable rooms. "If we let certain people walk now," I said, "we may never see them again when questions start. The storm gives us a clean reason to keep some of them close until we understand what we're sitting on." "You're talking about the old case," he said. The patience thinned out of his voice. "I'm talking about not being the one scrambling when a story goes online about High Ridge burying a missing guest," I said. "If this breaks, it will matter who was on the mountain when we realized what we know now. She didn't." He glanced at the lobby below, at guests rolling bags toward the doors, at staff smiling too broadly. "This is not the time," he muttered. "We have a storm to manage, and—" "This is exactly the time," I said. "Storms strip off the cosmetic layer. They show you the structure. A." He tightened his grip on the tablet. "If you start holding people back on shaky pretexts, we are one phone call away from police asking why, and guests filming themselves complaining they're being detained," he said. "And one email away from the board asking why my head of security is improvising crises during a legal hold. Just as I mained." "I'm not talking about locking anyone in a basement," I said. "I'm talking about using the safety authority you already signed off on. If I say a section needs extra checks before guests move through it, that's my job. So is deciding when it's safe to send a bus down an icy road. I'm not meant to." He weighed it. If he overruled me and anything went wrong, the blame would cut both ways. If he let me call it and nothing happened, he'd have given me more power than he liked. "Who exactly are you trying to keep?" he said. I could have given categories. Instead, I gave room numbers. The relative, the senior tech, a couple of long-term staff who had been here during the original incident, people whose testimony would matter if the welded door ever appeared in a photograph. "You're asking me to risk the rebrand and the town's main income stream on a theory you're not even authorized to pursue," he said. "You don't have a mandate. I don't have cover. And the mandate is in the badge you gave me," I said. "You put my name on safety calls. I'm making one." Then he stared another moment, then chose the only compromise that let him say he hadn't really chosen. "Fine," he said. "You sign off on any delays. In writing, your name, your call. I want it clear this is your risk, not an institutional admission." And "That's fair," I said. It wasn't, but it was enough. He signaled to the front desk to start moving early departures. I made my own list. When the first wave headed for the shuttle, I intercepted the rooms that mattered. I told the relative there were minor issues with emergency lighting on his floor that we wanted cleared before anyone used that stairwell. I told the senior tech I needed him on site for the duration in case we lost power and had to run things by hand. None of it was false. All of it had direction. Some guests complained. A few raised their voices loud enough to tilt the mood of the lobby. From the balcony, the manager watched with his tablet and his tight jaw while I repeated that safety trumped preference during severe weather. The younger clerk caught on and quietly steered other departures away from doors I needed watched. By the time the pass closure notice flipped from likely to in effect, the shuttle had left with half the people it had planned to carry. The others stood at the windows, watching the snow swallow the road they'd missed. Among them were the witnesses I needed. I had traded goodwill for access. As the wind hammered the glass and the lights flickered once, the room filled with the particular resentment reserved for people you have to rely on and no longer like. The manager came down after the last argument died at the bar. "You've just made yourself the most unpopular man in this building," he said. "Not the first time," I said. "If this passes quietly and nothing comes of your suspicions," he said, "you've taken a hit. You didn't need to. For people who won't thank you. If it doesn't," I said, "we'll be glad we know who was here when the questions started." Ugh. He looked at me for a long second, then filed that away behind his eyes. Outside, plow lights disappeared into a wall of white. The road had moved into the part of a storm where it belonged more to the mountain than to engineers. Inside, the resort sealed with it. We were all locked into the same container now, breathing the same air, carrying the same unsaid things. I had pulled the door almost closed on any exit that didn't end in a confrontation. Whatever came next would have to pass through this storm with us. By evening, the storm had settled into the kind of steady violence that made time blur. Wind hammered the walls in long pulses. Snow scratched at vents and doors. The building creaked in ways that belonged more to rock than architecture. Guests clustered in common areas, pulled toward fireplaces and bars like people once gathered around radios. Staff walked their routes with the narrow focus of a crew on a ship that knew it might take on water. The control room felt both sheltered and exposed. Radios, fire panels, weather feeds, security cameras, all of it converged there. I watched each channel for a minute, then glanced at the notebook where I had sketched the route I believed the missing guest had taken. From the bar, down a side stair, through the service core, past the now welded door. A path through spaces most guests never knew existed. Finding proof meant seeing it with my own eyes. I keyed the younger clerk's radio. "Control to night ops," I said. "You free to babysit the boards for a while." "We fort now." "I'm on it," he said. "You heading out?" "Because—" "Stormwalk," I said. "Structural checks. Call if anything spikes." He didn't ask which structure. I met the relative near the elevators. He wore a resort parka over his own coat, logo sitting oddly on someone with his history here. "You don't have to come," I said. "This is mostly for my benefit." End quote. "If you're going where he might have gone," he said, "I'm not waiting in a lounge chair for your summary." Was well. The younger staffer joined us at the service level, claiming he knew which doors liked to stick when the temperature dropped. It was a good excuse. The real reason sat in the tight set of his mouth. The service corridor door thudded shut behind us, cutting the public storm down to a muffled roar. The air was warmer, thick with a metallic tang. Emergency lighting painted everything in tired green. We moved single file. Pipes hummed overhead. Boilers thumped somewhere deeper in the building. "Watch your step," I said. "Floors sweat when the outside drops this fast." "Cool." We passed the active stair cameras, their lenses flashing ghostly in our beams. At the blind stretch near the welded door, the air felt different, as if we had stepped sideways into the part of the story no one had written down. Up close, the seam around the door looked harsher under the dim light. The weld bead caught the beam in a jagged line. The metal below showed faint streaks, vertical, as if something had once run down it and been wiped away in haste. "Here?" the relative asked. "Here," I said. He held his hand near the surface, not touching. His breath fogged the air. "What was this supposed to be?" he said. "Old service stair," I said. On the original plans. Officially. It's nothing now. He studied the blank metal. Feels like exactly the kind of place something disappears, he said. Out of the brochures. Out of the file. Oh vey. We walked on, following the turn my old map marked as likely incident zone. The floor dipped where the concrete met an older section. A metal railing lined one side. Added later, the younger staffer gestured toward it. Careful, he said. Floor's uneven. Carts catch here. And that... As if to prove it, my boot slid on what looked like damp concrete. I grabbed the rail. The relative caught my other arm. For a second we hung there. 3 bodies strung along a moment that could have gone either way. The railing shuddered. Something in its mounting complained with a long creak. You all right? The clerk said. Fine, I said. Floor tried to introduce me to the boiler room quicker than I like. Mind? I aimed my beam down. The patch that had nearly taken me out wasn't just water. A darker stain soaked into the concrete, irregular and old. Someone had scrubbed it hard enough to blur the edges, not hard enough to erase it. Could be rust, the clerk said. Too fast. Could be a lot of things, I said. The stain tracked toward the wall, fading where the floor met a section of cinder block that had been patched. The paint there was a shade off. Under the emergency lights, the difference was subtle but clear. The relative crouched beside me. They never told us there was any sign he fell or was hurt inside, he said. They talked like he just walked out into the snow. Windest grab. Files never mention this corridor, I said. Or that door. He reached into his pocket and unfolded the same small keyring I'd seen in the lobby. Metal worn smooth, where fingers had turned it over too many times. They sent this back with his things, he said. Said it was found in the room. Okay. I swept the beam along the wall. A faint impression in the dust near the base matched the curve of something that had rested there often. Not proof, not alone, but enough to make my skin prickle. May I? I asked. He nodded. I held the key ring near the mark. The sizes matched well enough to be one more piece in a pattern that had already stopped feeling random. The younger clerk pointed at a crack that ran jagged from the patched section out into the corridor. That's newer than the rest, he said. We had work done there. Before my time, but the patch is on our maintenance map. Patch, crack, stain, weld. The building had absorbed the story into its bones. Another gust hit the outer walls. The sound rolled through the structure. A deep groan. Dust sifted from somewhere higher, drifting through the beam like an indoor flurry. We shouldn't stay too long, the clerk said. If power drops, this level turns into a maze fast. 9. He was right. The line between investigation and foolishness thins when lights begin to look optional. I took a series of mental photographs. Distance from the welded door. Angle of the rail. Stain. Patch. Crack. The way the air cooled just enough to register. This is enough for now, I said. We know the path existed. We know something happened here that someone tried very hard to scrub out of the story. May Saint Day. The relative straightened with a small sound. I thought I wanted to see nothing, he said. An empty corridor. Prove it was all in my head. I don't know if this is better. Say? It isn't better, I said. It's just closer to the truth. Hast. On the way back, the resort felt slightly altered under my boots. The same pipes and hum. but threaded with the knowledge of where the official map had lied. When we stepped through the service door onto the guest level, bar noise and television chatter spilled over us. It felt like surfacing. The relative blinked, then looked toward the lobby and away from the elevators. "Whatever you're going to do with this," he said, "do it. I'd rather hurt with the truth than keep walking on this floor not knowing what's under it." And he headed for the stairs. The younger clerk lingered. "You're going to take this up the line," he said. "I'm going to take it somewhere it can't be buried by a weld in a log entry," I said. He looked back at the door we'd come through. "Then I guess I know which side I'm on," he said. When they were gone, I stood alone for a moment, listening to the storm clawing at concrete and glass. The mountain outside stayed indifferent. The building followed orders written years ago. The next decisions would belong to people again. We picked a room with no windows for the meeting, not for secrecy, but because the wind upstairs rattled the glass too hard to think. Down here, concrete made its own kind of quiet. A folding table sat in the middle with a tape deck, printed logs, floor plans, and my notebook. The general manager arrived first, tablet under his arm. The senior tech came next, the younger clerk just behind him. The relative took the far wall, hands in his pockets, watching all of us like he was still deciding if this would be worth the years he had waited. I closed the door. It latched with a dull, final sound. "This isn't a disciplinary hearing," I said. "We're not a court or a board. We're just the ones who were here then, here now, or both. I'm going to lay out what I know. You correct me if I'm wrong. Then we decide who else needs to hear it. In Stowe?" "We are still under a legal hold," the manager said. "Anything we say will be more than what's in the file," I said. "That's the point. Sazen." I started with the tape. Not the shout. Not yet. The blank label where there should have been a case, ID. The fact it had lived in a forgotten box instead of the archive. Then I pressed play. Static. Footsteps. Echo. "My name," shouted once. Then again. High and raw against concrete. The same voice I'd heard alone in the control room, now filling this one. The senior tech flinched. The manager stared at the deck as if he could will it silent. The relative closed his eyes. I stopped the tape after the metallic thump and the scrape. "That's 22:28, I said. "The incident report says the desk didn't call until 22:40. On paper, nothing happened in those 12 minutes. On tape, he was already calling for help. Nover." I slid copies of the report across the table. The younger clerk picked one up out of habit. The manager didn't move. "The file says cameras were functioning," I went on. "Maintenance. No anomalies. Search based on last seen near the bar and main exit. No mention of stairwells, service corridors, or any recording." I laid down the maintenance log. One line highlighted. "Stairwell cam 4, I said. Status adjusted. Routine reset. Signed at 22:28. Ages settled." The senior tech's initials sat under the yellow strip. He stared at them like they belonged to someone else. "We've seen the maps," I said. "We know where that camera used to be, where it is now. We know there's a welded door where the old stair access was. We've walked the corridor below and seen the patch, the crack, the stain no one ever mentioned to the family. Wong." The relative opened his eyes. Whatever he had hoped we would say, he now understood we were far past, nothing more to find. "Maybe Z?" I turned to the senior tech. 15 years ago, you told me the cameras in the service core were fine. I said. I took you at your word. I wrote it into my report. Was that the truth as you understood it? Or what you'd been told to say? End quote. It was both, he said at last. His voice sounded used up. The camera glitched. We were told to park it on a fixed angle until a replacement came. That angle didn't cover the whole stair. My boss said not to make a fuss. Point it somewhere pretty, he told me. We're selling an experience, not a wiring diagram. He rubbed his hands together once, as if trying to warm them. When the call came about your missing guest, he said, I knew that stair feed wouldn't show much. I told you everything was normal because that passed for normal. Half the system limped. We just didn't write that down if we could help it. They did. That explains the adjustment, I said. It doesn't explain the weld. It's time. After the search failed, he said, the owners brought in consultants. They walked the building, pointed at that stair, called it a liability. Too narrow, too steep. Someone wondered aloud if a fall there would look bad on paper. The answer was simple. Take it out of the equation. Weld the door. Reroute. Move the camera. Update the plans. Safer. On paper. 7. He looked at the floor, then at the relative. I signed the work orders, he said. Told myself we were preventing another accident. I didn't know there was a tape. I knew something had gone wrong and we were helping frame it as weather and bad judgment instead of our own choices. I took the overtime. I had kids. A mortgage. You tell yourself you don't have power. Turns out you pay the price anyway. End quote. The manager shifted in his chair. That was before my time, he said quickly. Different ownership. We've improved systems since. Over how? You also inherited the benefits, I said. Occupancy that looked cleaner than it should. A story that sold better than the truth. Racing. He swallowed. What exactly are you proposing? He said. That we call the police, admit to a historic failure, and invite a media circus onto a mountain that's already shut in. And sheet. I'm proposing we stop deciding other people's truth for them, I said. We log the tape, the logs, the weld, the plans, and the statements you've just made. We send that to someone whose job is to name it. Then it's out of our hands. If you do that, he said, the rebrand dies. Investors pull out. Staff lose jobs. The town loses its anchor. You almost certainly lose yours. He wasn't wrong. That was the worst part. The younger clerk spoke up, voice unsteady but clear. Some of us would rather not build our careers on concrete poured over somebody else's disappearance, he said. The room went still in a new way. The manager looked at him, then at the senior tech, then back at me. You're all ready to blow this open when we can't even promise proof a court would like. Day. No one here is promising outcomes, I said. We're promising to stop hiding what we do have. Look. I checked my phone. Signal weak, but present. The storm hadn't taken the last towers yet. Outside, the road belonged to snowplows and luck. Inside, we still had a line out. I'll make the call, I said. I was the investigating officer then. I'm head of security now. My name is already on the file. It might as well be on the correction. I guess well. I dialed the regional duty officer. When the line picked up, I gave my name, my old badge number, the case reference, and the short version, an unlogged tape, surveillance gaps, later structural changes. and witnesses willing to talk. I requested the case be reopened once the past cleared. I stayed with facts, tape, logs, welds, signatures. No theories. When I hung up, nothing in the room had moved, but the weight had shifted. "That's it," the manager said. "You think one phone call fixes this and Desser?" "No," I said. "I think it finally starts what should have started 15 years ago. They saw her. Outside, the storm kept roaring. Inside, we sat in the quiet after the point of no return, each of us counting costs we could no longer pretend belonged only to someone else. The storm broke the way big storms do, not all at once, but in stages. Wind dropped from a scream to a hoarse mutter. Snow settled where it had been thrown. Plows reclaimed the pass one slow cut at a time. By the time the first official vehicles made it up the road, High Ridge looked almost normal from the parking lot. Guests checked out late, complaining more about patchy Wi-Fi than about interviews. Staff smiled on cue, thinner at the edges, waiting for answers none of us could give. The team that came in wore plain jackets and neutral expressions. No sirens. They walked the same corridors we had walked, stood in front of the welded door, listened to the tape in the windowless room. They spoke to the senior tech, the younger clerk, the manager, the relative, and finally, to me. Their questions were practical. When I first heard the recording, who authorized structural changes? Who wrote which line in the original report? They traced signatures through logs and plans. They didn't ask why until much later, and even then only in the way reports ever do. Weeks blurred into statements, follow-up calls, and email chains from addresses I didn't bother to memorize. The legal hold turned into something less tidy. Contracts were reread. Insurance language was picked apart. There were meetings upstairs I never sat in and headlines I didn't open. High Ridge didn't close its doors for good. It didn't get to rebrand either. The original investors stepped back, politely. A different company made a leaner offer with stricter terms. The town council held hearings about taxes and jobs. People took turns choosing between numbers and justice without saying that was what they were doing. I handed in my resignation before anyone suggested it. The paperwork called it mutual agreement. They thanked me for my work during the storm and wished me well. On letterhead, it looked almost like a promotion sideways. On the inside, it felt like walking out of a building I'd just helped strip back to its frame. The younger clerk stayed, at least for the moment. "I gave a statement I can live with," he told me in a corridor. "Whatever happens to this place next, I'll find something." He was young enough for that to be mostly true. The senior tech took early retirement. Officially, health. Unofficially, we both knew he couldn't keep walking past that welded door and call it just another shut access. On his last day, he shook my hand outside the staff entrance, eyes on the snowbanks. "I should have pushed back," he said. "On the camera, on the stair, on the way they wrote it up. I told myself I didn't have the power. Turns out I paid anyway." "Well, we all did," I said. It was observation, not comfort. The manager stayed on through the transition. Someone had to steer the handover. He knew the spreadsheets in the boardrooms. We met once near the lobby. "You got what you wanted," he said. "No," I said. "I got what was there." And he had no good reply to that, so he nodded and moved on. The relative stayed in town longer than I expected. When I was clearing my locker, he came to find me. "They've told me what they can," he said. "About the stair, the camera, the decisions. There's still no grave." just more shape around the empty space. I wondered. I know, I said. I thought answers would feel like closing a door, he said. Turns out it's more like opening a window. Cold gets in, but at least you know where it's coming from. Entry. He took the keyring out of his pocket one last time and turned it in his fingers. Then he held it out. I don't need to carry this anymore, he said. You do what you like with that tape. Keep it. Give it to them. Just don't let anyone weld over it again. The keys were lighter than they looked. On my way out of High Ridge, I stopped by the control room. The monitors showed clean peaks and cleared roads now. The tape deck sat on a shelf with a proper label and evidence tag. It had finally made it into the record it should always have been part of. I laid my hand on the console, feeling boilers and pumps humming under the plastic. 15 years earlier, I had let a man's voice vanish into static because the paperwork said there was nothing there. This time, his voice had made it out of the room, onto official forms, into other people's heads. That was as close to repair as we were going to get. Outside, the air smelled of thawing snow and exhaust from the truck still working the pass. The road ahead was a narrow strip of dirty asphalt between high walls of ice. It didn't look inviting. It just looked honest about the difficulty. As I walked toward my car, I thought about the question that had followed me since I pressed play. What truth about that missing guest was worth breaking the second life I'd built here? The answer turned out simple. I could live without a pension from High Ridge. I couldn't live with a man calling my name from a tape and knowing I'd ignored him twice. Behind me, the resort stood with its new owners, its old welds, and a future that would never quite escape what we'd pulled back into the light. Ahead, the road bent out of sight. I drove down anyway.